Hey everybody, how you doing? Well, this week we have witnessed the death of King David and the ascension of Solomon as king. We can see all sorts of activity which seem very familiar. Political maneuvering, attempted takeover of the throne, backroom politics. And people backing the losing side, scurrying, trying to get back in good graces. And of course, we see many of the people not winning that attempt, and Solomon consolidating power. Now, after all this, only then does Solomon make that amazing request of God, which pleases him so. So, let me remind you to subscribe and click that bell down the bottom if you're on YouTube. If not, click like in the Facebook side. So let's move into the introduction, and then we can explore the new king in the Davidic dynasty. As I read through the accounts of David's death and the ascension of Solomon, it shows a number of things. Again, our world has not changed too much, and there are so many similarities between what we see in the news and the things written in so far in Samuel and Kings. We've gone into 4 books, and they are full of excitement, intrigue, and sometimes laughable moments too weird to even be made up. Maybe, if we look at some of the people surrounding, again, these would be the trusted advisors, people in charge of major parts of the court, and a few people that just happen to be there. We'd already talked about Nathan and Jonathan, but there are a couple others that are quite interesting. There is, of course, the whole story of the insurrection we talked about last week. It is possible that you may have missed why Absalom was so mad at his father, and how he was able to gather so much support. We discussed how very handsome he was, which even today helps in leading people. But his rage against his father was all about his sister Tamar. She was taken advantage of, and, well, quite honestly, she was raped by another of David's sons. Absalom really felt that there should be punishment for this. Who can begrudge him for that? However, as we have seen, and if we look close, David may have been a man over God's own heart, and he might be a great king, but he really sucked as a family leader. You get the feeling that all of his children act privileged, and David even seems to run away from conflict within his family. And again, no father is perfect, and I am thinking he probably had much to deal with as king, but not doing anything about your son who had forced relations with a sister, even a half-sister, should have been dealt with. David did nothing. Absalom took matters into his own hands and had his brother killed. For this, David also did nothing. So, Absalom, after a while and full of arrogance and pride, decided that King David would not have justice in his court. Absalom then would take over as king and create justice for himself. Now, obviously there is nothing funny of any of this, but inciting an insurrection based on a call for justice sounds like it might be a good idea, and many of David's staff came over to Absalom's side. One was a trusted advisor named Ahithophel. He was one of David's trusted advisors, and his defection was a severe blow to David. Now, there was a man named Hushai who went over to Absalom's side, but secretly remained loyal to King David. His betrayal of Absalom's cause was very ingenious, one that would make James Bond proud. Our newly acquainted Ahithophel created a plan to defeat David. Because of his standing and personage, Hushai proposed in its place a scheme of his own, which actually gave the advantage to David. This plan Absalom accepted. Absalom died. David won. Hushai stayed in good graces with David. Ahithophel killed himself. So, you see, all of this behind-the-scenes maneuvering for power is nothing new. And it should be a warning tale to be very careful you're seeking God's will. See, Hushai recognized that David was God's anointed. Was it nearly that simple? Of course not. But discerning is very important to whatever our vocation is in our lives. Now, another one of the advisors was Joab, son of Zeruiah. Now, we should ask who Zeruiah is, obviously. She is actually David's sister, making Joab his nephew. Now, one might at first figure family influence, but Joab was quite the commander. He is the one who led the army against the Jebusites, allowing David to rule over all of Israel, including Jerusalem. So he had his stripes as well. He was given charge over all of David's army. However, Joab had a darker side to him as well. His anger, rushed judgment would be a constant thorn in David's side. Joab's pursuit of Abner and his eventual killing of Abner as one of the issues, the killing of his own cousin Amasa. Interesting enough, Joab did this by kissing Amasa on the cheek and stabbing him in the abdomen. He did not have to stab twice. And finally, in disagreement with David's orders, Joab was the one who threw the spear that killed Absalom. David grieved, but was unable to punish Joab. But he did curse his family. And we'll get back to Joab in just a bit. Another interesting person and job in David's court was Jehoshaphat, the son of Ahilud. He was the recorder in the court of David and also Solomon. Now, this sounds like a real fascinating job, and it just sounds so cool, to be honest with you. The recorder was the chancellor of the kingdom. He brought all the weighty matters under the notice of the king, such as complaints, petitions, the wishes of the subjects, foreigners. Now, he also drew up all the papers for the king's guidance and prepared drafts of the royal will for the scribes. All treaties came under his oversight, and he had the care of the national archives or records, to which, as royal historiographer, it's sort of the same office that they had in Assyria and Egypt. He was able to add to the current annals of the kingdom. One can almost see him writing out all of these things for the future. And these are the accounts we're reading. Now, on the religious side, there was Zadok, the son of Ahitub. Now, there was also Ahimelech, the son of Abiathar. They were both priests, and Sariach was a scribe. One thing that should be understood is that priests or Levites all came from the line of Aaron. We remember him as Moses' brother. The lineage is pretty straightforward, although some people like throwing monkey wrenches in just to, for fun, but let's keep it simple. The scriptures show that Zadok is the descendant of Phinehas, and all of Phinehas's family go back from Aaron. You remember Phinehas from, of course, Phinehas and Pinchas, of that those two that were Eli's sons. So that one is all pretty clean. Ahimelech gets a little messy. Obviously, when you have a name like X son of Y, there are bound to be duplicates. So it appears there were two Abiathars, and each of them had a son was named Ahimelech. But regardless of the tracing, now both of them do get back to Phinehas, so is eligible to be high priest. Now, One of these high priests continued as high priest for his life, and another went down in a blaze of glory, backing the wrong man. It's a very good reminder to us clergy, the wisdom of the church, keeping us out of politics. That just as Zadok and Ahimelech, we can advise, but the job of the clergy is to advise on faith and morals, but not acting, performing the politicking. See, the Pope obviously has a political role he must fill as head of state, but his focus is on faith and morals. Reverend Martin Luther King focused on faith and morals. A priest who gets involved in politics can no really be able to act as advisor because his vision becomes clouded. This is why it's so vitally important that the laity become informed of their faith so well, and they are able to handle the rigors of politics and bring these faith and moral issues into the world and protect them. So apparently Ahimelech forgot this and backed the wrong horse, and we'll see this in a bit as well. So we are now going to begin the story told in 1 Kings about Solomon becoming king. Now, Adonijah was very ambitious. That was David's, fourth son, actually. First other three had died, Absalom and a couple of the others. But as David got older, Adonijah sort of installed himself as the new king. The reason I brought up the people I just went over should become clear as I read through the first part of chapter 1. Over here. So, it says here, Adonijah, son of Haggith, began to display his ambition to be king. He acquired chariot, drivers, and 50 henchmen. Yet his father never rebuked him or asked why he was doing this. Adonijah, then, was also very handsome, and next in age to Absalom by the same mother. He conferred with Joab, son of Zeruiah, and with Abiathar the priest, and they supported him. However, Zadok, priest, Benaniah, son of Jethoiada, Nathan the prophet, and Shammai and his companions, the pick of David's army, did not side with Adonijah. So you see right there how the two sort of split up. So that Adonijah slaughtered sheep, oxen, fatlings at the stone near Enrogel, and invited all his brothers, the king's son, and all the royal officials of Judah. But he did not invite Nathan the prophet, Benaniah the warriors, or Solomon his brother. So the fourth living son of King David tried to usurp power from Solomon. Perhaps we can relate this to a constitutional crisis of sorts. From those few verses, we can see lines had been drawn and various people from David's court supported different people. We know, looking back all these years, Solomon wins, but let's face it, at the time, David did nothing to stop his son from proclaiming himself king. You see, this is a constant theme of David's life, not correcting or setting his sons, presumably his daughters as well, straight. See, that sword is dangling again. But we have something new occur, one that we can take to heart. It appears that the king's mother has much to say in this, and we can take this spiritually right to our own king's mother as well. So let's see what happened. Nathan the prophet came to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, and made her aware of Adonijah's taking of the kingship. He advised her to go to King David and let him know the situation. And wasn't it his promise to hear that Solomon would be king after David died? Nathan came in and told David about the party going on and Adonijab's taking of the kingship and inquired about David, though thought we would follow him. We hear the following from David. King David answered, "Call Bathsheba here." When she entered the king's presence and stood before him, the king swore, "As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all distress, this very day I will fulfill the oath I swore to you by the Lord, the God of Israel. Your son Solomon shall be king after me, and shall sit upon my throne in my place." Bowing to the floor in homage to the king, Bathsheba said, "May my lord, King David, live forever." We see here that Bathsheba interceded with King David on behalf of Solomon. A bit later, she was also asked on behalf of Adonijab, asking for a favor of the king. See, this is a basic principle that the mother of the king had great influence on the king and decisions made. We take this principle and apply it directly to our own king, Jesus the Messiah. We can ask his mother to intercede, and she will bring the intercession to him. Jesus, or God, is the king and makes the decisions yes, no, or wait. But we can be assured from these intercessory prayers are actually brought to God. So, as you can imagine, there was quite the panic that occurred in Adonijab's court of Abiathar, who was sequestered, Joab, who was killed outright, Adonijab, who was also eventually killed. Solomon consolidated his power, and then, after his kingdom was settled, asked for the wisdom which God gave him in abundance. So, I think I'll conclude this week's reflection here. Getting to be onwards of quite a bit. So, next week we can discuss Solomon, his wisdom, the apparent loss of it, idolatry and effect upon a society, perhaps one close to home, and the beginning of the Israeli descent into captivity and destruction. Now, this does take a couple hundred years, but we might want to be paying attention to the root cause of these problems. So, let's keep a close eye on things happening around us. We have nothing to hide because God sees and knows all. This is good because he knows the fullness of all. And we should all have a great week knowing we are loved by someone who loves us more than any of us can imagine. So, we will see you next week. Continue more with Solomon. Hope you have a great week. God bless. Bye-bye.